Hello and welcome to this special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. I'm Joe Willis, the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA, and today I'm talking with Dwayne Bryant. Now, he's coming to the ILEETA 2026 conference in St. Louis, Missouri, and he will be presenting a course called The New Conversation, The Leader Within. And I cannot wait to hear how this came to be, what your thought process is on it. So I just want to shoot it straight over to you, Dwayne. Tell us about this course. What are we going to learn?
Absolutely. Well, before I tell you what we're going to learn, let me tell you how it came to be. I was on the south side of Chicago doing a workshop with fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. We're talking about bullying. And for some reason, I just veered off a subject and said, hey, if you're on a playground playing, minding your own business and doing nothing wrong, if a police car drove over, what would you do? My baby said, run. I said, hold on. You didn't hear me. I said, you're doing nothing wrong. Why would you run? They said, we don't want to get shot. We don't want to be harassed. And we don't want the police officer to stop us from going home. As a grown man, I'm sitting there thinking like, whoa, wait a second. If these are fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, what happened with 11, 12, and then, 20-year-olds? What are their view of law enforcement? Literally a few months later, I had an encounter with a law enforcement officer in Indiana that went viral. And that could have gone in a bad way, but it was two men listening, talking, seeing each other. And that encounter changed my whole perspective on law enforcement. Since then, I wanted to learn as much as I could about law enforcement. Believe it or not, my father was a police officer, and I joined the FBI Citizens Academy, et cetera. And I said, you know what? There's enough voices of division out here. There has to be some voices that understand both sides of the equation, but understand that this world, our communities, our nation need law enforcement, but we also need community as well, and we need them working together. So in this workshop that I've created, it literally became organic from the fear of the community, from sometimes even the fear of law enforcement. One thing Aaron Trooper Weller said to me is every time he pulls on, stops a car, he's afraid. Is this person going to get out with a gun? Is this person going to do this? And I'm like, whoa, everybody's scared. So then what can we do to mitigate the fear, to increase the humanity of individuals, even though we live in a rough world? And so the new conversation, Joe, is all about how we show up, our authenticity, but understanding that we are part of a human family, and together we can solve this human problem of law enforcement and community.
I love it. And when you see yourself in this classroom environment and you're having these conversations with police officers up to this point, what's been the reaction? How's it being received?
Oh, that's a great question. At first reaction is, who is this?
Arms crossed, leaning back in the chair. Yeah. Here comes another biased class, another person telling me I'm doing it wrong.
Oh yeah. Yep. Okay. Oh, yeah. And what's funny though, you even said that. Many officers have told me after the class, man, I'm gonna be honest with you. I thought this was some DEI bull crap. You're gonna tell us that we're racist. I said, I don't know if you are or not, but I'm not concerned about that. I want you to get this information. And they say, I had a few officers say, this was one of the best classes I've ever taken. You listened to us, you understood us. So yeah, it's not about DEI. It's not about what you're doing wrong. It's about what can we do right as human beings? How can we see each other and understand each other better, but also understand the legacy of law enforcement in this country and how certain communities just may have a visceral reaction when a police car drive over. A lot of officers did not know. For instance, when I share with them, and I won't get into it too deeply here, but I share with them, I said to my students, when I say the word police, tell me the first thing that you come to mind. We had 25 students in the classroom and there were 25 different responses. When the police officers read and saw those responses, they were like, wait a minute. Wait, I don't understand why they would see us this way. Not all of them were bad, but the majority of them were not very flattering. And so they were like, I'm thinking of my children. A lot of these police officers also had children as well, so they can humanize the encounter with the young people because they had children. So a lot of times officers don't understand the power that they have in their presence, but when they get out the car, before they even turn off the engine, they have a lot of power. And I want them to understand it. I want them to own it, but I want them to use it in a way that builds themselves, that builds the department, that builds the community, but also build the person that they're encountering as well.
So And I'm not going to ask you to share it now, but in the class, you're going to actually share what some of those responses were and kind of
Oh yeah,
that experience. And
absolutely.
um, when because for so long, I mean, there's so much emphasis on DEI and anti-bias, and that the backfire effect is alive and well. You know,
Mhm.
like you just mentioned, the arms crossed, leaning back in the chair. What makes this class different than what everybody's expecting to receive?
Sure. This class is so different because officers that I've trained are learning things that they never even knew about. So, for instance, COINTELPRO, right? Are you familiar with COINTELPRO?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, I'm
So,
not.
COINTELPRO was an initiative by the FBI to literally, quote, destabilize the Black community because J. Edgar Hoover was literally weaponizing law enforcement to go after, as he said, gays, hippies, Black community. And so law enforcement was the mechanism to do this. So when a lot of people and a lot of young people talk about fear, a lot of officers who have no clue as to the history, and we can go all the way back to the 1800s in terms of slave patrols and things of that nature. That was the history of law enforcement. And so my thing is, if you don't truly understand history and how history has impacted our country, then you don't fully understand how your presence also impact this nation even years later. So I think one thing I do is I share information like COINTELPRO. I share other data. I share literally statistics, for instance, in Illinois. And what we do is we do a group breakout. This always gets the officers going like, I never thought about that. In the state of Illinois, hold on, matter of fact, let me just pull it up real quick so I can give you some exacts. In the state of Illinois, roughly 30% of the, here it is right here. In the state of Illinois, roughly 31% of the youth population are white, 29% are Black, 34% are Hispanic, 6% are other, right? However, when we're talking about arrest, 73% of all youth arrested are Black, even though the population is 29%. 27% are white, and like maybe, I'm sorry, less than 27%, about 20, and about 7% Hispanic. So the question I ask is, how is it literally humanly possible that 30% of the population can represent 73% of the arrests? And then what I do is I have the police to get breakouts. This group here, you have to argue it's just what it is. There is no bias in the system. It's just what it is. This group here, you have to argue, though, no, this is police bias. Whatever it is, you have to argue for that. This group here has to argue, hey, they just weren't raised well. There's no fathers in the home. It's the Black kids. It's the Black community's fault. And when you hear this argument, I heard police officers say, come on, guys, let's be for real. We know that we can target the Black community because we won't get any flack for it. If we get tickets, if we get arrests, if the cars are old. I learned so much stuff that I had never even heard of. And I'm like, whoa. And so when the police officers had to defend their argument, they didn't worry about let's protect the badge. They worried about let's protect this particular silo that I'm charged to argue and defend. And then when we begin to have those conversations, okay, guys, what is the long-term impact of this? How does this impact our nation when schools only spend about $5,000 a year for a pupil? However, juvenile detention spends $45,000 a year per student. So when we look at the sustainability of an over-incarcerated population, it is not sustainable for America to be first world, because at some point, and we are beginning to see it now, the system has to break down.
Yeah, as it destabilizes, there will be a lot more issues. Now, as we have this conversation, I think there's certain facts in that you probably address in class is that there is inevitably, as you just said, a higher level of incarceration, which means that release from system back into community is higher in minority communities,
Yep.
and therefore the perceptions of law enforcement and the system are different, which is when you look at generationally why some of the beliefs exist. It goes back historically further than any of us can actually remember, but it's
Right.
ingrained, right? There's some generational issues there. But when we look at the communities that are burdened by economic issues, housing issues. You go back to some of the redlining and that sort of thing, some of the historical issues in our country that created these systems that perpetuate themselves for higher levels of crime, lower levels of economy. Inevitably, there will be higher rates of police interaction, negative police interactions in those communities. Is that addressed in your class?
That is addressed. And also a part of that is mindset is addressed, and then guardian versus warrior. When I do the police training, I ask the question, raise your hand if I'm going to give you only two choices. Raise your hand for the choice that best identifies you. Are you a guardian or a warrior? Literally 80% of the hands go up. I'm a warrior. And some people are like, oh yeah, I'm a warrior. I'm like, okay, well, let's look at it. And then we break down, what is the warrior's mindset? What is the warrior's mentality? How does the warrior show up in the community? What is the interaction of the warrior? But that's not what gets them. What gets them is, I say, now let's look at the warrior at home. How does the warrior show up at home? What is the relationship with the warrior with his wife? What is, or her husband, or whatever the situation may be? What is the relationship with the warrior's children? How do they see that particular individual? Then it begins to go. And then we talk about cortisol levels, blood pressure levels, officer wellness, alcoholism, things of that nature. Which one goes to the extreme? And then they're like, oh, yeah, that warrior may not be the best scenario. And then we talk about the guardian, the aspects of the guardian. The guardian is not afraid to pull out a weapon and enforce the law, but they do it with a different mindset. And so what I try to get the officers to understand, excuse me, is that your mindset show up with you every time you go to any encounter. And I believe two of the biggest professions that have the greatest impact in our nation are school teachers and law enforcement officers. Those two professions have the greatest impact. And I want them to understand their power. I want them to maximize their power and who they are, how they wield it, and then the consequences of, because it doesn't just stop at that encounter. It follows them home and it follows them beyond.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a lot more conversation to be had in that guardian warrior mindset space. I find an awful lot of times this immediate backfire when we get into the semantics of the differences, but I like how you drew the stark lines to the, here are the effects of that. You can be a warrior as a guardian. You absolutely can.
Absolutely.
And no one should ever feel as though if I take on the guardian mindset, as you've described it here, that I'm not prepared to go in teeth baring and, going straight for the jugular on someone if I have to.
Correct.
But the results of living that warrior lifestyle day in and day out show up differently, if I'm hearing you correctly. And you kind of want to present that and talk about it in the class, I'm guessing?
Yes. So that portion, we move into officer wellness. For instance, I won't say the police department, but there was a police department in Illinois that I have 3x5 cards, and I share statistics that I believe it's like 1 in 10 officers have thought about suicide in the last year, right? So I shared different statistics. I cite my sources. And then what I did with the classes, I said, okay, everyone has a 3x5 card. I want you to write a yes or no, a yes if in the past year or someone in this room with you right now has either talked about, mentioned suicide. Literally, we took the cards and just said yes, no, divided them up. When the chief saw that 25% of that classroom had yes, 75% said no, I said time out. Now, this was in an area that there was a huge police shooting, national news. It was completely ridiculous. This woman getting shot in her head, posed no threat to the officer. And when the chief saw this, I said, Chief, if 25% of your officers did follow through with their thoughts of committing suicide, what does this look like for a community? For you as the chief, clearly you're going to be gone soon, because that shows lack of leadership. And so when the officers, now they're looking around at each other like, was it you? Was it you? I'm like, that's irrelevant who it was. Let's get into the why. What's going on with law enforcement? These are the men and women that we're supposed to respect, to honor, to pay tribute when they come in the neighborhood. But if they're thinking about suicide, something has gone terribly wrong. And then we move into solutions for wellness, breathing techniques, and I have them to get up and share what they know, and then I share some other things. But this workshop, Joe, is going to get real. It's not, hey, we're beating up. No, we're not beating up anyone, because I believe we need law enforcement. When the whole defund police came about, people were calling me like, yo, we need you on this. I'm like, I'm not for that. I'm not for defund police. I say, let's train police, let's empower police, but let's also empower community, because the reality is the greatest police departments I've worked with, the chief, the officers have relationships with the communities they serve. I've had officers in other departments say, I don't care about the community I serve. I'm just here to do a job and go home. I don't live over there. I don't care about that community, but I was forced to work in that community. I don't even want to be there. Whoa, that is a powder keg waiting to happen, because at some point that mindset, that fear, that animosity is going to spill over, and maybe at the most inopportune time. Because when you're stressed, you have issues personally, things happened last night, guess what? You bring that with you on the next day to the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say, because you hit the nail on the head very early on, is that when a vehicle's pulled over, the person in the first vehicle is experiencing anxiety and fear, and the person in the vehicle in the back is experiencing their own version of anxiety and fear. And yes, I'm going to call out the elephant in the room to all my fellow law enforcement trainers out there and career professionals, is that fear is a real thing. Just because we mask it, just because training and experience helps us push through it, the reality is that fear and anxiety exists. And when the hair on the back of your neck starts standing up, decisions start being made. So as you talk about that fear and you bring it into reality, what's your perception on the rationalizing of the fear of the police officer? Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, I don't talk about, honestly, rationalization, but in the Q&A, in the conversation, it may come up. So for instance, Trooper Weller told me, every time I pull a car over, I don't know if this person is going to have a gun, if they're going to jump out and attack me, if they're going to assault me. So guess what? He doesn't have to rationalize that. That is his real concern and his real fear, because I also learned he has a newborn at home. That means he wants to get home to his baby girl every single night. He wants to get home to his wife every single night. And if it's up to me versus him, he's going to go home if he can help that. I understand.
100%.
When I told him I was afraid, he was like, I don't understand. Why would you be afraid? And I said, I don't understand. Why would you be afraid? Because I'm thinking, I'm a good guy. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I try to make communities better. He's thinking, but I'm a good guy. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I try to make communities better. Oh, we're on the same team. So part of that fear is not knowing who you're going to get. And I even say this in community workshop, you don't know which officer you're going to get that particular day. So the reality is, because that is true on both sides, that means we both have to regulate emotions. We both have to show up with mutual respect, share responsibility and accountability for every single stop, even with the fear, because if we can't regulate those emotions, fear will take over. And then the implicit bias and all this other stuff will come into effect. But there's a time where we have to feel the fear and be professional anyway. Not just police, but community as well. Because some community members act a complete fool just if the police stops them, and they take it to the whole another level. However, I always say this, police are more responsible for the outcome of the encounter because they're trained, they've been sworn in, and they should have skill sets, whether it's verbal judo or whatever, that the community may not have. And it's like if I'm a teacher and I'm in kindergarten and the kid starts acting a fool and throwing stuff around, I'm not going to take the kid and throw him against the wall. Why? Because I'm the adult in the room. I'm the one who's trained. I have the authority. I have the power. I also have the authority to take your life and your liberty. I have that authority. I don't use it as my first resort. And that's what I want the officers to understand. Hey, you are the authority at the encounter.
Yeah, there's so much there, and this is the conversation you're going to have in this workshop. I'm very excited for, because inevitably, life experience and training tells us that there is so many threats out there. There are a million ways to die on every traffic stop. There are people in every community who are a genuine threat to law enforcement and their safety. And so everything that's trained is trained in such a way that it allows that trooper and every other police officer to go home safely to their family at night. One of the challenges, as we look at the psychological burden of the job, and you talk about that, it sounds like in depth in your class, the continuous, corrosive, almost sandpaper-like experiences we have tend to decrease officer wellness, the resilience, and our ability to respond with empathy and to be fully present in the moment, which is a huge safety factor. And so as you have this conversation with folks, the reality, or the perceived reality, I should say, that prevails is that cops are the good guys. And if the public just did what they were legally supposed to do, none of these problems would happen. Right? What are your thoughts on
that? My thoughts are, the majority of the time you are correct, not all the time, because police represents community. And you just said, part of the community, there's an element there that should not even be in the community. Well, I hate to say it, there's an element within law enforcement that should not wear the badge, because officers have told me it's those officers that give them a bad name. It's those officers that do crazy stuff, speak to anyone any kind of way, maybe. And in the workshop, I actually share, a few bad apples, myth or reality. And I show them whole police departments that have been banned, officers who, and recently in Memphis, Tennessee, these were Black officers killing, just beating the hell out of this guy, like gangs, like what's going on? So we can't pretend that all officers are the ones that's coming to ILEETA, because the reality is they aren't. As a matter of fact, your guy, Derek Miller, talked about psychological evaluations, and we can't rush putting people on the force, because if you do, garbage in, garbage out. So that's the reality. So we don't want to ever pretend that all of any organization, you have terrible teachers, you have doctors who get sued for malpractice. So why should we pretend that 99% of officers fit this great professional mold? It's just not true. So what we want to be able to do is understand, if we create the culture of professionalism, even those officers won't feel safe and they can't hide when the culture is great. Now, I want to say this really quickly. 1 week a month, I go to Memphis. In Memphis, I work with 13 through 17-year-old first and second degree murderers, carjackers. So these are the boys that those officers are afraid of. And when I talk to them, I'm like, what the hell happened to you? What is your mentality? So I do understand the need for fear. I've heard some of the students talk about, the firearms they have in the car, and they're deciding what they're going to do when the officers come. Do we drive away? Do we shoot? Do we put the guns down? And I'm like, whoa. So I think, Joe, from my perspective, is very unique, because I understand and I have roots and groundwork in both communities. And so the conversations are so rich, because we're able to create and formulate solutions individually as well as collectively. But the departments I work with that does it the best, they understand the fear is real, but they also understand every officer has to come with a high degree of professionalism. Because even when you do, the research shows, even if you arrest someone and you do it lawfully with respect, the community members still have respect for the badge and for law enforcement. But when you use excessive use of force and when you misuse your power and authority, that's when the disrespect begins to erode, and we can control that.
Yeah. And I really appreciate how you explain that, because the reality is that both sides of that conversation need to be fully understood. And I really appreciate how you pointed out that there are, without a doubt, a number of police officers, as there are in every other profession, who just don't belong. And they are hiding in cultures that allow them to hide. And what I was really hoping you'd say, and you essentially did, was that the goal of the good officers, the ones who truly care about the communities, not that one who says, and that I felt a visceral response when you talked about that officer who said, I just work in that community, I could care less about them. That is incredibly offensive to that community and our profession. And so as we look at this, it's much bigger than just we get it right on this side, they get it right on that side. And it doesn't matter if which side of that we're talking about here. It has to come together. There has to be some sort of an involvement in a meaningful conversation. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you with this question. If I am that officer, if I am the one who is seeing these things, I really want to make a difference, I really want to connect better with my community, where do I start?
I think you start with self-awareness, right? You start with understanding how are you really showing up, not just my perception of myself, but the reality. And that means if you can't get out and walk in the community, why not? Why do you have this fear? What are you afraid of? Let's have the conversation, because there should be someone in that community, whether it's the faith-based leaders, whether it's the community activists. Everyone has people in the communities that really want their community to thrive. So then I would say, if you are that officer, how are you showing up every day? What also, let's forget about the badge. How do you show up for yourself? How do you show up for your family? How do you show up? Are you a goal-oriented officer? What is your mindset? Because all of that, who you are individually, is who you are with the badge, but with the badge and the uniform times 10. So if you don't care, if you're lethargic or whatever, times 10. So what I want the officers to understand is who you are as an individual is really, truly who you are when you put on this badge. If you don't care times 10, because now you don't care and you have an authority, and you can hit one button and you can get 10, 20 other guys or ladies to come and back you up. And so I just want us to be mindful of our power and our presence, and be mindful that we're either building or destroying, and we're going to do it together. Not just law enforcement, community, but nation as well. And I mean, I don't want to go to the spiritual level of souls and all that stuff, but that's a different conversation for a different group.
I love it. Yeah, and I would just add to that immediately when confronted with some of these conversations, I've seen my peers in all directions kind of have one of those arms crossed. It's not me. I'm tired of this crap. It just keeps coming at me day in and day out. I'm a good guy. I hear you loud and clear. If that is you and that's the way you're responding to this, ask yourself about those who are not that good guy. What could you be doing? Because you got to admit, they're out there. There are the ones who just don't get it. The other thing is, regardless of how good we are, how well we intend to show up, could we do better?
And absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And here's what's interesting. That's funny you say that, right? I think I'm a good guy, but this good guy, sometimes you can get on my nerves. This good guy can say something like, did I just say that? This good guy sometimes doesn't get enough sleep, and I'm aggravated and I'm frustrated and my patience is short. So yeah, we're not arguing whether or not you're a good guy or good woman or not. It's really about, are you effective at what you're doing at your job when you have that opportunity, that moment to interact with the community. I don't even argue whether or not you're a good guy. I assume you all are. That's my thought process. But how can we be better if we can?
How can we be better if we can? Dwayne, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation at the ILEETA conference and everybody who's involved in it with you. Certainly, it's going to be a tremendous session, and I'm looking forward to seeing it firsthand and getting the feedback from it. So I will see you in March 16th through the 21st at the ILEETA Conference and Expo in St. Louis, Missouri. Dwayne, stick around for me just a minute. I got a couple of quick questions for you.
Okay.